There you go. Okay, all right. You want to talk Nakato at 62 points or Dan Hollins at 87 points?
Welcome to the Rugby Rant podcast show, your premier North American rugby podcast. Growing rugby, one fan at a time.
And welcome back, rugby fans. Here we are for episode 133 of the Rugby Rant podcast show. A reminder for all our fans tuning in, my name is Ty, the Safa Braga, and per usual, joining me is my colleagues, Rob, the Hammerschmidt, Scott, the big guy Ferrara, and a familiar face for many who would have seen him here before, but back again for another bout. We had TJ Olsen. TJ, welcome back, my friend.
Boys, it's always good time to sit down and chat North American rugby. I'm super excited to be back. Let's rip straight into it. I'm ready to go.
I like it. And what we're going to be debating here today, just so everybody knows, what we're going to do is first dive into Around the Pitch as we share some news from across the rugby realms. So yes, and diving into this episode, we're going to be talking more about rugby and specifically the introduction of the idea whether a tour for the women's British and Irish Lions could be feasible in the future, and could the USA be a good host for one of those upcoming tours? We're going to take time to debate this and more, but first, we best jump into Around the Pitch to share more news from across the rugby realms.
When we pick up the ball, we also pick up a legacy. A legacy that stretches beyond your current team. A legacy built on the backs of those who came before you with hard work. And for those who will come after you, we promise it won't be easy. But we'll be there, supporting you on and off the field.
All right, gentlemen, you know how it goes, but for those who don't know, we're going to go rapid fire around the screen to share whatever you think is noteworthy that fans at home tuning in can learn more about rugby here in North America and abroad. And we're going to start it off with our guest, TJ Olsen. What do you got for us?
So we're sticking with the theme. We've got the women in charge, and this weekend, the first game of the Women's Premier League competition, aka the WPL, kicked off this weekend. We had some incredible first hit-outs. Beantown had a 60-plus point victory in their first match this weekend. Colorado and Berkeley both scored a narrow 2-point victory over their opponents. And the competition's looking a little different without Atlanta, San Diego, or Oregon, but the competition's still looking really good, very solid rugby. And with that theme, if you're a young woman player who is hoping to one day play for a WPL program and just want to develop your skills, the start of the under-23 rep season has officially begun. So if you're interested, reach out to your local rugby union and register to trial for one of these teams. I will be coaching the Pac South Women's Under-23 team. And we're going to be hosting trials in LA on the 30th of April and selecting a team to compete in your neck of the woods, Ty, in Iowa in June. So really excited to go to Iowa. Never been there before. So yeah, it's women's rugby still alive and well in America.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, but as you said, never been in Iowa, and I'm looking forward to be there. I could see Rob laughing and smiling inside, going, "Well, I don't blame you." But you know what? There's always good rugby.
They went to Chicago last year, and now they're going to the huge metropolis of Des Moines, Iowa.
Hey, this is a really great place for sports. We don't have much else except sports
And corn.
but you know, it's going to be good fun, and I hope that we'll catch up for a beer, TJ, and I'll get to be able to see you out there doing your thing alongside some really great athletes, taking the sport forward in the U.S. And on that note, we're going to hand it over to Rob, the Hammerschmidt, to give his piece.
Thanks, Ty, and welcome back. It's been a minute. You've been tended to your business, but I want to talk about something close to home that's incredibly near and dear to my heart as I've gotten ingratiated to the Chicago Hounds and they've opened up their arms to me. I've gotten to know a lot of the boys and become very close to them. And one of those guys is Luke White, just an incredible guy. I had a chance to touch base with him last week as I was watching some of the training, the forwards get some work in. And as he came off, he said to me, "Hey, Hammer, do you know of anybody else that's played in the front row, the second row, and the back row in the MLR. And I had to think about it for a minute. I said, I'm not the foremost expert. I think James Dealey is the person to ask. And so I rung him up. And sure enough, according to James' records, nobody else has played in the front row, second row, and back row in Major League Rugby career. So Luke White is the first guy to do it, played number 8 against San Diego. So a chapeau to Luke White. Congratulations, mate. You are a heart and soul man of that Hounds team. And let's hope you guys keep trucking, get some things on track here very shortly.
I think one of the greatest things that I love about Luke White, and I got to know him very briefly when I was announcing for them at the Raptors in Glendale when, of course, they were still around. But he did an interview while with the Raptors and the local Colorado TV station talking about promoting rugby and how wonderful the sport it is and how safe it is with a giant shiner on his black. The irony was brilliant. It was the poster child of the advert for every rugby fan, but imagine the rest of the country going, what? You say go out there and get more of that?
I would argue if Dylan the Butcher Fawcett was only 4 or 5 inches taller, he probably would have hit that first. Unfortunately, he was not blessed with the height.
Yeah.
You might have been right. I mean, both have been playing rugby a long time in the US, and we thank them for that. But that certainly is going a long way to be able to show the pedigree of his character and as an athlete to be able to be that versatile and an asset to any team. So there you see him with the Hounds, previously, of course, with the Giltinis, and former to that with the Raptors. So certainly he's paid his
love
dues.
me some Luke White. Love it. He was a great one to have in LA. I love Whitey.
Excellent. Let's hand over to you, Scott. What do you got?
Well, July 15th, 2023, the World Rugby Football League is putting on the New York City Sevens tournament. They've dubbed it the world's greatest rugby sevens. Hits New York City, the world's richest $1 million prize. They're flaunting a lot of these HSBC sevens teams to come in, and their gig to try and get them is that this is going to be a tune-up for the World Cup matches coming in, and that's what they're trying to do. Work out some guys, get some guys some time. It's interesting. We know that the World Rugby Football League has had sevens license for years now. A couple failed attempts at trying to do something similar. And I mean, we're talking, 7 years is a long time. They do have this little plan that's interesting. I'll just go through it. So phase 1, 2023, 16 games in one 8-hour event with a $1 million cash pool. This is the one that we were just talking about that's happening July 15th at Red Bull Arena. Again, doing it in New Jersey, but calling it a New York City event. Phase 2, 2024, 48 games with 4 events. They'll have playoffs in New York City and LA with finals taking place in Vegas, and that's a $4 million cash pool. And finally, phase 3, 2025, 112 games with a $12 million cash pool, and the events will be showcased in Dallas, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, with finals taking place in New York, LA, and Vegas. Again, don't know if it's going to get off the ground. The big guy has asked for some press creds.
Yeah,
if it happens,
is ambitious.
Yeah, if it happens, the big guy will be there and definitely give you a thorough look at what went on and how it went.
Yeah, and we hope to be able to see every one of these be a great success, because obviously it's for the greater good of rugby. But it comes with a little bit of skepticism when you add such an impressive money figure to it, because it usually comes down to the important question is, where's the money coming from? But of course, they've advertised it. It's going to be interesting to be able to see. We'll continue to be able to follow it through Scott, who's going to be able to share some summary of the action, having had the opportunity to hopefully see it in action himself. Not too far from your home, easier drive. So we'll learn more about that in time to come. And let me dive into the last piece over here to be able to talk about women's rugby. And in particular, we talk about the Pacific 4 series, which does include USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And the second leg has been announced that the host will be Ottawa. This is great to be able to see them trying a new venue, a great opportunity to be able to re-engage rugby audiences thereby. But also it's going to be great to be able to see double headers in all these actions. So they're going to be moving into the second leg there. That'll be July 8th and 14th, where you'll get to be able to see the action. The broadcasting rights have not yet been announced, so stay close to their social media accounts. I'm sure they're going to be sharing that information shortly, but you can assume there will be broadcast partners. They're just I guess, fixing the details. But we hope to be able to see it viewed by fans both here in the US and Canada. So it'll be important to be able to participate as a fan by just tuning in. The more eyeballs they have, the greater it is for a rugby product, the more likely it is to be able to get even better play from a variety of networks. And it's easy to be able to do. We imagine that it's going to be not be behind a paywall. So that means that you have no excuse and you can support women's rugby, because that is certainly one of the great futures for rugby globally. We're going to be talking more about that in a moment as we take a break. First, to hear from one of our partners before diving into the important topic here today to talk about the idea of whether a British and Irish Lions tour for the women's game is feasible moving forward, and should the US be considered as a host.
On this week's edit, I've realized that we've forgotten to honor two individuals that have achieved 50 caps playing in the MLR. And I wanted to make sure that we followed through on this tradition that we've started and do right by honoring these two individuals. The first is at number 41, Eric Howard from the NOLA Gold, and of course, cap for Rugby Canada, a hooker in his own right, and one heck of a player. And also Peter Malcolm from the Seattle Seawolves at number 42, once again honoring the 50 for 50. So we'll again continue to follow up with this as we edge ever closer to that 50th player to reach 50 caps in the MLR. But until then, we'll continue the tradition. Tighthead Brewing Company is not just Chicago's premier location to watch rugby and enjoy quality ales and lagers. It is also a great place to enjoy local acts performing live music every Thursday and Saturday nights. Additionally, their Wednesday night trivia nights are something not to be missed. Tighthead is located in Mundelein, Illinois, and easily accessible for many Chicagoans, as it is just steps away from the metro. Owner Bruce Durr and the Tighthead staff are dedicated to ensure your microbrew experience is as tight as their beers. Bruce's love for rugby extends beyond the origin of his brewery's name. Tighthead is committed to supporting the rugby community. This includes his support for Lake County RFC and our own Rugby Rant podcast show. Tighthead's tap room is like the familiar rugby clubhouse in which friends and teammates can meet, socialize, and enjoy the wide variety of brews on tap. Regardless of whether your palate enjoys a good IPA or dark barrel-aged brew, Tighthead can deliver. Hey, Chicago, when you want rugby, Tighthead Brewing Company will satisfy your thirst. Tighthead, it's worth more than a try.
Welcome back, rugby fans, episode 133, and we have an interesting debate here. And again, we're going to be diving into the interesting proposal that will...
Release the crowd!
What is that noise in the background there, Rob?
The Chicago team's right next door. There we go.
Right. Well, yeah, I've been spending so much time on rugby. My wife kicked me out. I've now had to take up residence in the Dome next to CP Stadium. So, you know, the hounds are out and about at all hours here in Bridgeville, Illinois. So, you know, making do with the best.
All right. The hounds getting in on the action here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. It's good to be able to have them on board. Thank you very much for joining us.
Got to pay them
So let's highlight the importance of this for everybody tuning in. Recently, there was a proposal, or not a proposal, but there was a feasibility study that wanted to identify whether it might be a good idea to be able to host a British and Irish Lions tour for the women's rugby game, wherever that tour may take them. Now, traditionally, it's been the host nations have been South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia as former colonies of the British Crown. And that's kind of been, you bring the best of what you've got against the best of what we've got. And so it traveled from every 4-year cycle to another nation. This is how it has been traditionally, but yet in this study, it was actually shown that America for the Women's Lions Tour could be a great venue. We're here to be able to debate the merits behind that. Why do we think that is a great idea? If it comes to fruition, which again, we're not saying it has, we're not saying it will, but it's an interesting conversation. And that's why we're here today in episode 133 to be able to talk about that. So we're going to give it to each one of these gentlemen to highlight why they believe the US should be considered as a partner and host to a future Lions tour if it ever should come to be. We're going to start it off with TJ Olsen. Why do you think so? Tell us why.
So before I answer the USA portion, I feel like just from me, there's no reason why this team shouldn't go ahead. From a rugby and entertainment perspective, this tour go ahead just to promote women's rugby. I think they did a recent couple of interviews asking some former players, should this happen? Why should it happen? There's too many reasons why it should happen.
Right, there's certainly an appetite there.
Yeah, it's definitely there. And I think just the team that they would assemble, you get foaming at the mouth thinking about just some of the combinations that you would be able to get from that. So I think you clearly see from the success of the Women's World Cup, there's definitely a want and need for more high caliber women's rugby to be played and televised. And the evidence of the Red Roses game at Twickenham Stadium, how many tickets they've been able to sell, it's just spoils galore. But the question regarding if the USA women should be a part of this initial tour. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky for me personally, because I think my answer comes down to what kind of involvement do USA have in this tour? So I think USA, when you think as a country, they definitely have the capacity with the stadiums and everything like that to host it. But when you look at it, and me, someone who potentially wants to coach the USA women's one day, I think you'd benefit from it, playing a game against a team like that, because the only way you get better is when you play the best opposition possible on a regular basis. But looking at the World Cup that just happened, I don't think the US could compete with a first string or second string Lions team from the combinations that you just see on paper or thinking from that. So from an entertainment standpoint and from growing the game here in the US, having North America be the focal point of the tour is not a smart idea, in my opinion. I think maybe down the line, it's potentially something that can happen, but not right at this minute or maybe in a few years. The first Lions tour for the women, in my opinion, should be in a country that's based or somewhere that has a couple of countries close together that has a strong talent pool with depth, where you could put on a variety of teams in multiple different matches against Lions, and they could play around with their combinations, do all that type of stuff, where all games are somewhat competitive. So if you look at the Lions tour that happened in New Zealand, the Lions squad chopped and changed while they played the All Blacks, the Māori All Blacks, the New Zealand Barbarians, which is the third,
and I wanted to be able to help people understand, because maybe they aren't actually aware of what a Lions tour looks like. Not only are they playing the national side, but they're playing the different clubs in between, provincial or whatever else. That's hence the tour. So when you're talking about the broader spectrum of the quality of rugby, you're taking into consideration, from amateur to semi-professional all the way up to professional. And that's what you're saying, it makes more sense to be able to have a country maybe like New Zealand. So continue. I didn't want to derail you.
No, that's great. Because I think one thing you've got to consider is there's a lot of people that may not follow it as close as we do. So we know the nuances and the ins and outs of all this stuff and how this all comes together. But it leads me to my point. Thank you, Ty, for that, because New Zealand and Australia for me is only the only logical place that could be the first tour for me, for the Lions to really start it off and see the Lions tour start, and then we kind of delve on that and make sure that it sticks around, because I feel like if the USA women, who struggled against competition like Italy and Canada in the Women's World Cup, and I'm just trying to be realistic about how competitive this Lions team on paper would be. The only way I see the USA women being involved in this first inaugural tour is if the Lions make a pit stop on the way to traveling to Oceania or somewhere like that, and they have a tune-up match. If the tours are a focal point in North America, from my opinion, USA, just let's make an executive decision that we assume that in my opinion, that the USA are going to get convincingly bent. How entertaining would that be for a new fan or someone who's trying to look at that? And I think the last point I'll make, I was at the game where the All Blacks played the USA in Chicago. I met a lot of new fans who watched the All Blacks put on a pretty heavy score against the USA. I haven't heard a lot from those new fans since. I don't know if they're still watching rugby. So I feel like that's the way it goes, where the USA is a pit stop and then they have a tour down in Australia and New Zealand. That's where I would go with it. But that's
a
my
really
opinion.
interesting take. And I think it's refreshing to be able to hear this as a really a powerful position with the first guest here. Because really what it comes down to is you're like, yeah, we'd be a good host, but not for your first tour. You know, we still need to be able to match them on the field. Then we need to be able to match the fan experience that people have come to enjoy from a Lions tour. Yeah. So traditionally, New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa, there's a history of success. There's a tradition that they follow. So you're building upon years of success from previous Lions tours that you're hoping will translate to the rest of the audience, but for the women's format. So you're already building on those structures, building on those there. Now, to that point, I would add South Africa, you didn't throw that name out there, but they are one of the traditional partners, would probably not be a good partner because they're just not at the same level in regards to the women's game as they are in the men's game. Not
Correct.
Nearly enough focus has been given to them, although that is progressively changing, but they're behind everybody else, in particular, Australia and New Zealand in comparison, and even the US and Canada. So you put up some really, really good points, a great way to be able to start this debate. We have one against it. Let's hand it over to Scott to see what he thinks.
Let's get hot, baby. So I think TJ had a point where he was saying it would be a stopover, but this is where it gets interesting. Play the North American Barbarians. Get the ladies who are playing over in the Premier 15s. Right. Canadian Americans, put them on one team for this one-off match.
And between those two, you've already got 15 professional players.
This is what you got more than that. I mean, it's a ridiculous number of percentage. I think it's something like 70% of all the women playing over in the Premier 15s are North American women. So for the first one, I think you're right on that. But here's the other thing we also have. We also have a proven infrastructure on how to put these games for free online, right? With the advantage of TRN, who's now proven in their third season, right, third or fourth season with TRN, that they can package a product. They have the production value, especially if they use a true stadium. They do have the power to get the views that you need and do the production you need.
On that one note there, I'm just going to add a point to that. If it was Rugby Canada they were competing against, TSN would have the rights to be able to show that, and that excludes the opportunity for everybody to watch it for free. But if it was the North American Barbarians or whatever you wanted to call them, it would actually be a product outside of that package and could be placed on TRN, making it accessible for everybody. To further your point, that's
exactly, and that the other on the other side, it would be a Flow Rugby event if it was on the American side. Yeah. So that's why if you could package it as such and finagle your way out of the contractual obligations to have TRN do the production of this, I think you could easily package that for the UK people back home to watch. You have a 10 a.m. kickoff. It'll work, and they're going to see familiar names they see in the Premier 15s week in and week out. I disagree with TJ a little bit when he was talking about the fans going back to that All Blacks match. It seems as though right now, if you're looking at who's watching women's rugby, they're not really caring about the the score is not there. They're getting into the culture. They're getting into the individual players. They're getting there are a lot of people on social media. I got to shout out my girl. Hold on one second. There's a girl. She's about 12 years old. Her name is Frankie out of the UK. She's at that rugby girl with 2 L's on TikTok. She has almost 5,000 followers, and this is what she does. She promotes the game of rugby. She promotes women's rugby, and she's going to all the Six Nations matches on the field as somebody who's covering these matches as a content creator at that young of an age. So I mean, you have there's this broad spectrum of people who are now being exposed to rugby, and it started with the rugby culture, not, I would say, the typical sports way of, the team got mollywomped by the All Blacks.
I'll take that. That's a good point. No, I just think that's a great perspective to add.
That's what I'm seeing. But I think in the next couple of tours, what you do is that's one thing you package. Also, you could package as Team USA and Rugby Canada kind of get up to snuff. Like we're having the Pacific Fours and it's going in, the next one we talk about Ottawa stuff. You say, okay, well, the Lions come here, the All Blacks come. And then you package multiple matches over 2 or 3 weekends in America. And that way, again, We can do the production to broadcast it for the Oceania group, on the West Coast. We can do it for the UK people on the East Coast and kind of bridge that gap. You have both teams traveling to places that have the infrastructure to host them and host their fans.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that at a certain point, I think that's the compromise we're going to see if these start going forward.
So there's a really, really good stuff inside there. And I like how, TJ being a great guest can concede, hey, that's a good point. And that's why we have these debates, right? That's why
don't start that. Okay. Hey, I take the point, but always right. Get out of here. Come on.
So let's unpack a few of those things. So what Scott was referring to was essentially the marketability of a product, right? The rugby product, and the development of the Lions brand in a new market as well. So there's the marketability, the profitability, all these things that really they have to be able to look at. Because when they have decided to be able to introduce the idea, could this be feasible? We all have to be able to know that it's money that's driving these decisions. Could it be profitable? Will it be marketable? Will it now have these secondary benefits of growing the game, building a brand, all of these things? And the answer is probably yes to Scott's point, but not in the packages we know it and have seen it before. So to your point, TJ, is as the package has been traditionally seen and served to the rugby public, the answer is no. Where we lie in between might be with Rob Hammerschmidt. So let's hand it over to him.
Thanks. Well, I think there's some meat left on the bone between what my two colleagues have presented.
A few scraps.
I'm gonna try my best to find those scraps. I'm like one of those turkey vultures that comes down from the sky.
I just picture hyena and Lion King. That's what I'm picturing.
So at any rate, if one of my dogs were at hold of them. One of the things I'd like to start off by saying is, obviously what TJ led with non-starter, this needs to happen for women's rugby. A Lions tour needs to happen. But then we can also wrap up something new, fresh, exciting in the women's involvement in the Lions tour and reimagine how that might look with Lions tradition. So blend the old with the new. So what are we talking about? Well, first of all, obviously women new to the Lions tour, but the fact that, to Ty's point earlier, South Africa is probably not going to be a destination, at least in the near future. They're not far enough along. But is North America far enough along? And the idea of a barbarian side somehow working into the mix certainly presents kind of a new optic, if you will, and brings in a new rugby segment of the population in the world, obviously North America. But then we also can go back to what the Lions Tours originally started off as is an actual tour where it's designed to spread rugby and spread a love for the game. I go back to my first contact that I can remember with the Lions tour in 1997, Martin Johnson and Neil Back and Delalio and all those guys, Tom Smith, Gregor Townsend going into the South African, communities, the largely Black communities, and, teaching them rugby and having contact with them. How great would that be in North America?
It's funny that you bring that one up, though. I was actually at one of those rugby camps. I was 13 years old playing Western Province rugby, and they did the same for the Any Rugby World Cup. But yeah, it's the community outreach, those programs. Right. And I didn't mean to derail you. It's just funny you mentioned that. I actually have a personal connection to that. Right.
And so I guess I'd present it in this way. If you look at the rotation, when would the first Lions tour happen? Probably not going to happen for 4 years, 2027, right? Which is the same year, by the way, that the men's World Cup would be happening. And so you really have to give some thought to the rotation, right? I don't know that the United States is ready on the field to play a Lions team. Would they be ready as a Barbarians team, as Scott and TJ both talked about? Yes. And that's where they could do a bit of that to at least ignite interest in the women's game in kind of a long view preparation for 2023 or 2033, right? Then you come back in the next tour to North America and you play like USA and Canada. And hopefully if World Rugby's done what they're supposed to be doing, along with the promotion of 23 2031 and 2033, promoting the game and developing the game and getting more women involved and encouraging women to play the game, do you have a better standard of play at that time? Can you sow the seeds early on with the Lions Tour to help promote and develop the game in North America so that it's ready to happen 2031? And now all of a sudden you've got a launching pad for 2033 when the women's game will be in North America as a Rugby World Cup. So it's that long view, greater vision for how this Lions Tour can really promote and develop the game in new parts of the world that perhaps it traditionally hasn't touched upon, and using the women to do so.
Yeah, and the women's game has had so many great achievements of late. And for those of you that aren't really aware, we kind of dabbled in some of those thoughts here through the course of the conversation. But New Zealand, to start off with, has been most recently a successful host. In fact, the most successful host of a Rugby World Cup to date, and record attendances, selling out Eden Park. And with that comes the great honors of being crowned the champions too. So they certainly have proven that there's an appetite in New Zealand. Then in England, so too the appetite has grown, where they are now moving from one stadium to a larger stadium. In fact, the largest platform for rugby in England, which be Twickenham, the home of the RFU, and has, I believe, ticket sales in excess of 40,000, which rivals even internationals at Six Nations level, not only for women's game, but I mean the men's game, which traditionally has been the pride and crown jewel of the RFU. And as they wish to continue to protect that, they also want to be able to protect its brand, but grow it at the same time. And so there lies their struggle. Do they take a risk?
Well, here's
consider it's not.
Here's the other thing, because you talk about spreading the game of rugby. Maybe what you do is you have New Zealand come over to the United States to play that Lions tour, and then what you have is the curtain raiser is USA playing Fiji or US playing Samoa. Because again, the infrastructure.
It could even be a USA playing a second British and Irish Lions side. Yeah. Because if they do it traditionally, they're going to have enough players there. They could put two teams on at the same time.
Right. The British and Irish Lions always travel with much larger squad because they're playing numerous games. And
there's a midweek side and a test side.
And I just because in my
on the right path.
And think about what that does, by the way, for some of the sides that aren't on the level of England. I mean, obviously Scotland's not quite to that level. Wales isn't quite to that level. They're having some struggles in their own right, the professional ranks. But you can get a lot more of those players from those sides into those midweek matches, so to speak, that would help the development of their upper echelons of their player pool.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think showcasing women's rugby in places that don't have the infrastructure, right? So you, like I said, you could take some of those Pacific Islander teams to come to the United States, knowing that, we have the infrastructure as far as television rights, stadiums, that type of thing, to then again play the United States as a tune-up game. Or they one weekend USA plays that Lions B side, and then the next weekend they play Fiji or Samoa.
Well, I think it's the year of innovation. Is like there's so many different types of things that we're trying to do, and that's what's happening with rugby. Is we're kind of breaking our mold. And I think as soon as you said that, Scott, I'm on one side going, I want my rant and argument to be better, but I'm sitting here going, man, he brings up some good points. Yes.
Honestly, I think no, but I think TJ just made probably the best point of the night is you can use this as an innovation of what can be done, because I feel we have broken the mold in some respect of that old boys club that everybody talks about.
In some respect, we have to go back to the pandemic itself to be able to allow for opportunities like this to exist, because that was, nearly 2 years of no rugby to be able to rethink everything we did. It forced us to be able to change the model, which already was struggling. Super Rugby changed overnight. URC suddenly became something. Fallen away was the Pro 14. US Rugby, like others, went through its struggles. Bankruptcy. So obviously what we have been doing has been fine for some, and for most it hasn't. So for those that it has been, they need to be able to go, okay, what have we got that's good? How do we make it better? Well, we've reached the potential in the men's game. Sadly so, the British and Irish Lions tour, I don't think will be as easily accepted by rugby fans to say, hey, let's go to America for the men's game. No, that's just not what has been done. The rugby purists out there will be screaming from every rooftop, hell no. But in the women's game, they're engaging an entirely new audience who is impressionable with whatever you want to be able to do. They're eager, they're open to suggestions, they're willing to adapt, and it's the market that will give you the most potential and the growth. When you look at growth as one of the metrics for success, geographic diversity, inclusivity, all these great points, welcoming of an inclusive culture. In fact, I'll read you the list of criteria here, and I want everybody to have this in their mind and imagine a visual check inside your head. Opportunity for growth, geographic diversity, potential for commercial success, welcoming and inclusive culture, state-of-the-art facilities, tradition and history of hosting the tour. Okay, USA and Canada are out there, but that's only one thing. The rest are on the board. Then the next is rugby expertise and experience, meaning have they hosted events of this scale? You could argue yes. You could also argue no, depending on what angle you come from. Then finally, previous record attendances that rival the other nations. USA, sure, is not there on maybe 2 of the last 3. Probably on attendance. They don't have a history of success in hosting similar tours. So I want that to be the basis of the last part of this conversation, to focus on the criticisms that others might put forward when saying USA should not be a host. And let's start with the first one. When we talk about experience and expertise of hosting similar stuff, who wanted the opportunity to jump in on that?
Well, and that's where I guess I would say, I think the Lions Tour presents a different type of host experience than does per se a World Cup.
Yeah.
Right. Because in a World Cup, you have multiple venues and you have, pools and you have a series of matches, and then you have the knockout part of the competition. And, you have to house, how many teams are there? 16 or there are 20 now, 20, something like that. And, you've got 35 players and you got another probably 15, 10 to 15 people on the management side with each team. Think about the kind of infrastructure you need to host all those teams, right? You don't need that much infrastructure to host a Lions Tour. You're talking about one large team, yes, but one team. You're talking about 3 to 4 tests, depending upon how it's organized. And you're probably talking about a home base, which you have a plethora of major cities that you could bring into the fold. And I'm sure that there are a number of places you can find.
Logistically, it's actually easier because there's only one team traveling to multiple locations instead of multiple teams in multiple locations.
Correct. You have one home base that's going to serve as their place to kind of train and organize and eat, et cetera. And then we go out for the test. You obviously have facilities that'll work all around the United States. So I don't think it's that big of a challenge. And like I said, for me, it establishes a tune-up for 2031, 2033. This is a tune-up for the United States. Get ready. It's coming. Here's your kind of a little test. Sure
and I'll even add to the point on that is, like, obviously from a traditional standpoint, if the British and Irish Lions are going to play USA or something like that, my point is still like they're not ready. But I think the aura of the British and Irish Lions coming to USA, it's a lot of people will sit there and go like, oh, the All Blacks are coming, blah, blah, blah. It's something like that's just going to be an experience in itself, because you've got, I know it's the Barmy Army, that's the cricket team for England, but like all the fans that would travel over to America from the UK and from all those areas just so they can live that experience in here, and then people hear about that, the aura around all the games. It's going to be very enticing.
On that note about traveling, it's way easier for a UK fan to travel to the US than it might be Australia or New Zealand, certainly on their pocket.
Yeah.
Listen, 2016, you had Saracens playing the London Irish at Red Bull Arena. I think they sold at 25,000 seats. I think they sold 18,000 tickets. That was 2016 for a fucking premiership match. Like, we're not talking
right. And that's an
national test match.
No,
that was a league match. It was a league match.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
And then the next year it was Newcastle versus Saracens in Philadelphia, and the same thing. They sold about 75% of the tickets. But my point being,
2016.
That's that Premiership rugby in 2016 and 2017 selling out 75% of the stadiums they're in, and now we're talking about an inaugural British and Irish Lions tour, and Team USA being involved. And we know that, especially in the United States, when the Eagles play, we show up. So, regardless of who's traveling, we're still going to show up in whatever venue we're playing in.
And you know, getting back to one of the challenges, like the United States, you know, is it a on the field? Is it positive enough a challenge? I guess I'd only ask this question, like outside of New Zealand, and I agree, New Zealand would probably be the ideal for the first one. That'd be the ideal team to face. But outside of New Zealand, who's kind of in the mix to challenge British and Irish Lions side? I mean, quite frankly, England was an odds-on favorite. It's going to be heavily England influence if it's just purely selected on merit alone, unless you decide, hey, we're going to sprinkle in some of the other sides because we need better
10
representation.
Top 10.
You know,
England
France,
right now. England, New Zealand, France, Canada, Italy, Australia, USA, Wales, Ireland, Japan. Well, guess what? England, Wales, Ireland are all going to be part of that.
I personally feel like although Australia on paper doesn't have the best team to compete against, like they're not on the same level as the Black Ferns, they're not on the same level to compete. It's like if we go traditional route where we play British and Irish Lions, Australia, but they do have the Super W where they've got the depth where they could have their second and third string play the Brumbies or the Reds or play like Scott's idea like a barbarian side or something like that.
You bring Australia to the United States. You bring Australia and New Zealand to the United States.
Oh, great point, actually. So Rob point, Scott point, because Charlotte Caslick, when she was here for that LA Sevens, not LA Sevens, but they came and did that halftime show at the Coliseum. I obviously went to school with her and I got to catch up with her. But the amount of girls that were just flocking towards her heard, Charlotte Caslick is in town. That came just specifically for that halftime match. They didn't care about the Guiltinis. They came and just went, I want to get a picture with Charlotte.
Nobody
Caslick.
Cared about the Guiltinis, but
get out of here.
50-year-old men flocking towards her.
Plenty. And I was shooing them away because they're all that's all it. But yeah, no, it's
but this is what you're talking about, right? So if you take Australia and the United States, which are right now in the same tier, and you bring in New Zealand and that British and Isles, the Lions over, that's where you have the thing. You have, USA plays Australia, New Zealand plays the Lions, and then next week you flip those. You know what I mean? You have New Zealand play Australia because that's always going to be, and then USA play the Lions. And again, I think they will bring in so much broadcast numbers, even though Australia might get killed by New Zealand. That's still going to bring in broadcast numbers.
And one thing we haven't said, but I'm sure many people already know this, but it might be worth mentioning, is that in regards to women's sports, rugby is among one of the fastest growing in the nation. Regardless of where it may be, but certainly at a college level, it's finding the greatest. And that's going to be who are your next generation of professional athletes. Those will be who will be buying tickets as well to be able to go and experience it. They will be the lifeblood of a really great rugby culture that will support a tournament like that in whatever version it might be on American soil. And if it comes to be that it also includes Canada, I'm sure both would be acceptable hosts. But we wanted to be able to, in these final moments, remind our fans who are tuning in and listening to us do our thing here that they have the opportunity to tell us what they think. Is it a great idea? Do you think that America could support it? Would they be competitive on the field? And would they offer a competitive product overall? Let us know by following us under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod. As per usual, you can do so on social media, all the major platforms, while continuing to enjoy our content through TRN and all of your podcast platforms, wherever you may choose to consume it. We are there and we'll be here week after week as we do here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. As you know, to grow rugby one fan at a time. Gentlemen, it's been an interesting debate, but I think as we stand, this was all about trying to convince TJ that we're right and it should be in the US.
I got to be honest. If USA Rugby and the MLR just listen to the four of us with our ideas,
right.
I'm telling you, these ideas work. They just got to implement.
Yeah. Look, we don't know the specifics. We don't know how to put them in action. But I tell you what, it certainly is a reflection of what the general rugby population might be thinking. And I think that all of us can agree that we've already seen some of the stuff that we've spoken about here find its way into professional rugby in one way or another. Because, we do have a few ears that do happen to listen that are close to the action. And if a few of those might be listening in here as far afield as the UK, America is ready and is willing to host. So pay attention, because we're an audience that is continuing to grow its appetite and will continue to grow the game while we do it. So TJ, as per usual, thank you very much for joining us, and a strong presence always here on the show. Thank you very much. But did you have any final words you wanted to be able to say?
No, I think, man, like I've been watching the British and Irish Lions since I was a little kid, and like you always come in and you know the traditionalism and everything that comes with the tour and just every time I jump on this podcast, I think my coaching gets better because we start to spray out so many different ideas and we start to innovate and break the mold even more. And then my brain just starts flowing. So yeah, Scott, even though you're a piece of crap when you come on here half the time, I still love all the things that you throw at me because man, you get my brain working like no one else, man. So it's good stuff. But no, I think like you said, we don't have all the answers, but I think we've got some pretty good ideas. And I think if we do start to stick with that innovation and we start to do that, we're going to continue to grow rugby one fan at a time, just like the Rugby Rant. So it's good stuff. I think we stick with that mold and yeah, let's get more high caliber rugby, especially for our women over here in America.
Absolutely. And of which you are a great ambassador. And I hope to be able to see you here in Des Moines, Iowa, while you apply your trade in honor of the sport. And we wish you the best of luck with that encounter. We'll continue to be able to follow it and hopefully be able to cover your success here on the show as we invite you back, I'm sure, in the future to be able to talk about that and more when it comes to rugby. But on behalf of myself and the rest of the team, a big shout out to Scott, to Rob, and of course, everybody else who's been tuning in. We thank you very much for your continued support, and we will stick around to continue doing this week after week with your help. And thank you very much for tuning in, and we will catch you at the next.